James Davis stood on the front porch of his new home in Willow Creek Estates, taking in the picturesque neighborhood that promised a fresh start. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the manicured lawns and quaint houses lining the street. This move marked a significant milestone for him, a chance to leave behind past troubles, embrace new beginnings, and forge connections with his neighbors. The pristine community seemed alive with laughter and camaraderie, painting a perfect picture of suburban bliss. His excitement was infectious as he meticulously planned his first family barbecue to celebrate the occasion. He imagined sharing stories, laughter, and delicious food against the backdrop of his new yard, a bright green oasis filled with blooming flowers. As he set up the grill and arranged chairs around the patio, he felt an overwhelming sense of hope for what lay ahead. On that day, James's sister and her children traveled from out of town to join in on the festivities. Their arrival heralded a joyous reunion while filling his home with warmth and laughter. However, unbeknownst to James, this simple gathering was about to trigger a series of unwelcome events that would redefine his experience in his new community. When Eleanor Thompson appeared at his door, a formidable presence clad in her self-appointed HOA authority, James's world tilted unexpectedly. No sooner had she introduced herself than she launched into an explanation of HOA rules surrounding guest registration. Caught off guard by her aggressive approach, James listened as she reprimanded him for allowing unregistered guests on the property. The tension escalated when Eleanor made it clear that this oversight was unacceptable. She informed him that every visitor needed prior approval from the HOA. Despite feeling blindsided by this sudden enforcement of complex regulations he had not been made aware of during his property purchase, James chose to handle the situation with grace. He reassured Eleanor that he would comply moving forward and register any future guests without delay. Yet, James's compliance did little to appease Eleanor's overzealous nature. In the days following the barbecue, things took a sharp turn for the worse as Eleanor began laying down fines for supposed infractions related to family visits that had previously gone unnoticed by other residents. Each infraction worsened James's spirits as he found himself navigating an increasingly hostile relationship with someone who wielded her power like a weapon. It became painfully clear that Eleanor viewed her role not merely as an enforcer of rules, but as a self-declared guardian of community standards, regardless of fairness or reason. Still clinging to hope for peaceable resolution, James resolved to comply with all regulations rather than escalate tensions further. Yet little did he know, this conflict was only beginning. His initial desire for community connection would soon devolve into a dramatic battle against not just rules, but an individual's disturbing misuse of power that loomed over Willow Creek Estates like a storm cloud waiting to unleash its fury. The day of the barbecue arrived, and James was buzzing with anticipation. The aroma of marinated meats filled the air as he expertly flipped burgers on the grill, spurred on by the laughter of his sister's children playing in the yard. Neighbors passed by, some waving hello, others stopping to chat briefly, reinforcing James's belief that he had made the right choice in moving to Willow Creek Estates. It felt like a picture-perfect day, one that promised connection and joy. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the gathering, James's home transformed into a lively hub. Stories flowed freely alongside the food, and each shared moment deepened his sense of belonging. He felt that this barbecue would mark the beginning of lasting friendships and happy memories in his new neighborhood. However, as the festivities reached their peak, an unexpected knock on the door shattered the jovial atmosphere. Standing there was Eleanor Thompson, her face a mixture of authority and disdain. Dressed in her trademark polo shirt adorned with HOA insignia, she wasted no time launching into an explanation of the Homeowners Association's rules regarding guest registration. James's heart sank as he listened to her assert that his sister and her children were in violation of HOA policy for not being registered guests. Confusion clouded his thoughts. How could he have overlooked such a stipulation? It hadn't been mentioned during the purchase process, but Eleanor was unwavering. She insisted that every visitor needed prior approval from the HOA, regulations meant to maintain order, she claimed. Caught between disbelief and a desire to maintain peace, James responded with an apologetic tone, assuring her that he would rectify the situation by registering any future guests. However, Eleanor didn't back down. Her demeanor suggested that this infraction was more than just an oversight, it was an opportunity for her to assert her control. The tension lingered well past Eleanor's departure, gnawing at James as he returned to his family. What should have been a night filled with laughter now felt overshadowed by unease. As the evening wore on and guests began to leave, Eleanor's presence loomed larger in James's mind, transforming what should have been a joyous occasion into a moment fraught with worry. In the following days, Eleanor's reaction only intensified. She began issuing fines for what she deemed violations related to his family's visits, each notice landing like a gut punch. The playful camaraderie he had hoped to cultivate quickly soured into resentment and frustration, making it clear that Eleanor saw her position not as a service, but as an authoritarian rule. James found himself navigating an increasingly hostile environment where every interaction felt scrutinized through Eleanor's critical lens. Once excited about integrating into his new community, he now faced an unexpected battle against someone who wielded power without regard for community spirit or fairness. This seemingly minor conflict over guest registration soon escalated into a larger struggle for respect and justice within Willow Creek Estates, one that threatened to rip apart the very fabric of what made the community feel like home. Despite the intrusive interruption during his barbecue, James felt a twinge of determination to comply with the HOA regulations as Eleanor Thompson outlined the rules regarding unregistered guests. He had not been made aware of these policies during the purchase process, and it gnawed at him that he could have unknowingly placed himself at odds with his new neighbors. Nevertheless, he chose to focus on making amends, hoping it would restore peace to his family's celebratory atmosphere. In the days that followed, James diligently began researching the HOA rules he had previously overlooked. He scoured through every document and email concerning his property purchase, searching for clarification on guest registration policies. The documents seemed labyrinthine, filled with technical jargon and convoluted clauses, but he felt a sense of responsibility, both for his family's sake and for the community he wished to foster. With a deep breath, he reconciled his bewilderment by accepting that compliance was necessary to forge a harmonious living environment. James crafted a plan to register his sister and her children as guests during future visits. Determined to adhere to the regulations, he filled out the forms Eleanor had directed him towards. The prospect of cutting through Eleanor's authority didn't sit well with him. However, part of him believed that if he complied, she might ease up and allow him a reprieve from her scrutiny. On submitting the registration paperwork, he hoped this gesture would help mend any rift caused by his earlier oversight. However, James was unprepared for the rapid escalation that followed his attempts at compliance. Within a week of submitting the registration forms for his family, Eleanor delivered unexpected news. Once again, she appeared on his doorstep, holding various notices in hand, not just for outstanding fines, but also for alleged infractions involving past gatherings and unapproved events taking place in his own backyard. Each letter was an additional reminder that Eleanor's control extended far beyond mere guest registrations. James felt disbelief morphing into frustration as he read through the charges that piled up like snow in winter. It astounded him how she continued to find faults even after his willingness to conform. He felt trapped in an unwelcome game where every move seemed to be scrutinized through her lens of overzealous authority. The community spirit he longed for seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse as tensions mounted. Despite being met with growing hostility from Eleanor and her cavernous ambition to wield power over residents, James maintained his resolve. With each fine handed down and rule imposed, he clung to the notion that all would eventually smooth over. After all, he believed firmly in open communication and recognizing missteps. Little did he know how significant this mounting conflict was becoming, and how deeply it would penetrate not just his life, but the very essence of Willow Creek Estate's community identity. A fight between fairness and oppressive misgovernance that was only beginning to unfold. Despite James's efforts to mend fences with the HOA, Eleanor's reign of terror was just beginning. Within days of submitting the guest registration forms, he received a barrage of notices detailing fines for various supposed violations, many of which had never been communicated to him before. The first fine arrived for an alleged noise complaint during his barbecue, an accusation that baffled him considering the laughter and banter were no louder than any average gathering. It felt like a personal attack rather than a legitimate grievance. As he meticulously examined the HOA regulations, James began to note an increasing number of unreasonable rules being enforced selectively by Eleanor. For instance, she imposed restrictions on the number of visitors one could host at any given time, citing a safety concern that felt more like an invasion of privacy than a genuine effort to ensure community well-being. These limitations quickly escalated from mere nuisances to full-blown absurdities. a limit of 2 parking spaces per household even when there was ample room available, which directly affected family visits. As if this weren't enough, Eleanor took it a step further by introducing obscure policies prohibiting guests from using common areas unless specifically approved prior to arrival. The impact on his family's interactions was crushing. James's sister could not take her kids to the community playground without paperwork filed in advance, an oppressive method that completely contradicted the vibrancy and freedom he had imagined experiencing in his new home. Each notice left by Eleanor sent James down a spiral of frustration and disbelief, eroding his sense of security and belonging in the neighborhood. The camaraderie he once envisioned with his neighbors began to dwindle under the weight of Eleanor's authoritarian approach. Almost overnight, the entire community atmosphere transformed from one of friendliness to anxiety, as residents began whispering about their own encounters with the HOA president. He felt an urgency to speak out against these actions, but feared further retaliation. Meanwhile, Eleanor's obsession with compliance extended beyond merely imposing fines. She unilaterally decided who could visit whom and when. When James planned another family gathering, expecting newfound clarity with the registration process now in place, he was dismayed when Eleanor outright banned his family from attending as a form of punishment for continually challenging her authority. The realization that Eleanor could dictate such terms rocked him. It turned what should be joyous family gatherings into events steeped in anxiety and uncertainty. As tensions piled up, so did James's resolve to confront this escalating climate of fear and control. He turned to his father, Judge William Davis, who possessed both the knowledge of law and a keen sense of justice. With Judge Davis's intervention looming on the horizon, James prepared himself mentally for what was shaping up to be not just a matter of personal dignity, but one that would potentially upset the balance of power within Willow Creek Estates itself. Little did they know this brewing conflict would soon expose cracks in Eleanor's oppressive reign, sparking a confrontation that would lead them down a path toward confronting corruption, restoring community spirit, and reclaiming their rights as residents determined not to be subjugated by misguided governance any longer. As the situation with Eleanor continued to deteriorate, James knew he needed support, and who better to turn to than his father, Judge William Davis. A respected figure in the legal community, Judge Davis had spent a lifetime championing fairness and justice. He had always been a guiding light for James, teaching him the importance of standing up against wrongdoings. This moment was no different. It was time to bring his legal expertise to bear on the escalating tyranny of Eleanor Thompson. Upon hearing about the ongoing conflict with the HOA, Judge Davis wasted no time in arranging a meeting with James at his home. He arrived armed with a sharp mind and an undeniable presence that immediately put James at ease. "You've done well to document everything," he praised as James spread out the papers detailing Eleanor's fines and arbitrary regulations across the dining table. James shared every detail: the fines, the unreasonable guest policies, and Eleanor's recent decision to ban his family outright. With each revelation, Judge Davis furrowed his brow deeper, realization dawning upon him that this was not simply a case of minor neighborhood disputes, but a troubling pattern of abuse of power. "It's clear she's overstepping her bounds," Judge Davis stated firmly. "We need to dig deeper into her actions and see if there are legal grounds for a challenge." His experience provided a necessary construct for navigating what felt like an increasingly chaotic situation. Fueled by his father's guidance, James gained confidence and clarity about how to confront Eleanor's blatant misuse of authority. Over the next few days, Judge Davis conducted thorough research into the HOA bylaws and state laws governing homeowner associations. Not only did he uncover inconsistencies in Eleanor's enforcement of rules, but he also began gathering evidence suggesting she might be involved in unethical practices, like accepting kickbacks from developers eager to manipulate regulations for their own benefit. Each revelation sparked further resolve within both men. They knew that they couldn't sit idly by while Eleanor wielded her control unchecked. Equipped with newfound information and courage, James found himself more than just a victim. He was becoming an advocate for his neighbors who felt similarly oppressed under Eleanor's iron-fisted governance. As they prepared for a confrontation with Eleanor at the next HOA meeting, a gathering that promised tension, James felt an exhilarating combination of anxiety and hope. The day would not just be about defending his family. It represented a turning point for Willow Creek Estates itself. As they walked into the community center that evening, adorned with nervous neighbors who shared furtive glances toward them, Judge Davis steeled himself by reminding James of their purpose, standing up against tyranny and advocating for transparency within their community governance. This was more than just about fines or unregistered guests. It was about fighting for integrity in their neighborhood against those determined to exploit power for personal gain. James inhaled deeply as he entered that room filled with uncertainty. He knew they would need all their strength for what lay ahead, and he was ready to take back control of not only his life, but also the spirit of Willow Creek Estates itself. As the conflict brewed between James and Eleanor, her retaliatory measures took on a more personal tone that left James feeling both attacked and isolated. Just days after he and his father had begun to confront Eleanor's authority, she issued an outright ban on his family from visiting his home, a move that struck at the very heart of everything he held dear. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just about fines anymore. It was a direct assault on his right to have loved ones in his new home. The moment he received the notice, a wave of disbelief washed over James. How could someone wield such power over the familial bonds that brought joy and comfort? He recalled moments spent laughing and sharing stories with his sister and her children in the backyard, vivid memories now threatened by Eleanor's draconian decision. The realization spiraled swiftly into anger. How dare she dictate who could enter his own house? As if that weren't enough, Eleanor continued to wield her authority with reckless abandon. Neighbors whispered of her vendetta against him, speaking in hushed tones about how she seemed particularly fixated on making an example out of James. This meant more than just enforcing rules. It felt like pursuing a personal agenda against his family. With each unjust fine levied and each visitation denied, James's sense of community eroded further. It was as if Eleanor were single-handedly tearing apart the very fabric of what many considered their peaceful neighborhood. Eleanor's obsession reached a new low one harrowing night when James's sister went into early labor. With urgency coursing through him, James rushed to prepare to take her to the hospital. However, he was met with yet another barrier. Eleanor had blocked his driveway, citing violations for unregistered vehicles. Panic gripped him as every passing second increased the stakes for his sister and her unborn child. In that moment of desperation, he realized this struggle transcended mere HOA disputes. It became intensely personal. Each time they attempted to navigate a situation involving family, birthdays, holidays, even simple visits, you could almost hear Eleanor's voice echoing behind them, reminding him of the chains she had placed on their lives. Her actions now not only against him, but against anyone who wished to visit represented a fundamental breach of trust within their community. Fueled by these trials, James steeled himself with determination. He understood that while he could feel isolated in this battle, there were neighbors who empathized with his plight, quietly enduring similar injustices at Eleanor's hands. It was time not only to fight back for himself, but for all those who lived under an oppressive regime masquerading as community governance. When he strategically aligned with Judge Davis and began gathering evidence not only to face Eleanor, but also to expose her corruption within the HOA as a whole, they knew it would be a difficult climb ahead, but one necessary for regaining their neighborhood's dignity and harmonious spirit. What began as a struggle for personal freedom transformed into a rallying cry for justice, a movement that aimed not merely at confronting one woman's tyrannical behavior, but protecting everyone subjected to the whims of authoritarian governance within Willow Creek Estates. Together with determination ignited in their hearts, they prepared themselves not just for another meeting with Eleanor, but for empowering their community to reclaim its spirit, dignity, and identity once and for all. The tension in James's life reached a breaking point when he received an urgent call from his sister, who was unexpectedly going into labor. Panic surged through him as he realized he had only minutes to get her to the hospital. The news sent adrenaline coursing through his veins. This was no ordinary situation. It was a medical emergency that could not wait. With frantic determination, James quickly gathered his things and rushed outside, ready to help his sister in any way possible. But when he stepped onto his driveway, a wave of dread washed over him. Eleanor Thompson had struck again. She had parked her car at an angle that not only blocked the driveway but completely obstructed access to the street. "Are you kidding me?" James exclaimed in disbelief, staring at the vehicle that now stood between him and his sister's safety. He could hardly believe that this blatant act of obstruction was happening during such a critical moment. In that instant, every ounce of frustration he'd felt over the past weeks boiled over into sheer rage. James approached Eleanor's car, aware that she must be inside, likely reveling in her power and control over him. As he knocked on the window, his heart raced, not just from urgency but also from anger at how far this situation had escalated due to her relentless need for authoritarianism. When Eleanor finally rolled down the window, a smug expression greeted him. "You can't have unregistered guests using your driveway," she stated flatly, as if it were perfectly reasonable to impose such rules in this dire circumstance. "Eleanor, my sister is in labor. I need to get her to the hospital," James pleaded, stressing the urgency of the moment. But instead of compassion or understanding, all he got was a hardened gaze and an inflexible stance on her arbitrary regulations. "No exceptions," she replied coldly, as if she actually believed her rigid authority outweighed human decency. The standoff felt surreal, a powerful woman wielding control over something as fundamental as a man's ability to help his family during an emergency. In that challenging moment, it dawned on James just how twisted and personal this battle had become. Eleanor wasn't just enforcing rules, she was delving into vindictiveness that threatened their very well-being. Desperate and fueled by fear for his sister's safety, James took action. He quickly assessed alternate routes to escape. There had to be some way around Eleanor's blockade. He dashed back towards his home and found an alternative path near the back of their property that might allow him to reach the road without being hindered further by Eleanor's obstruction. As he sped away toward the hospital with his phone in hand, providing brief updates about their progress, James felt a surge of determination swell within him. He would not stand idly by while someone abused their power in such a profound manner ever again. That incident cemented for James what had once seemed like arbitrary rules, transformed into moments of drastic personal consequence. The fight against Eleanor's tyranny transcended mere HOA disputes. It now carried implications for family bonds and basic human rights within Willow Creek Estates itself. This harrowing experience propelled James further into action alongside his father, Judge Davis. They needed to expose Eleanor's abuse constructively and comprehensively before her actions led to more chaos within their community, a necessary step toward reclaiming their lives from her tyrannical grip. With the stakes at an all-time high, Judge William Davis immersed himself in a thorough investigation of Eleanor Thompson's activities as president of the HOA. He meticulously combed through documents, meeting minutes, and financial records, seeking any evidence of wrongdoing that could substantiate James's feelings of oppression and injustice. As he delved deeper, it became increasingly clear that Eleanor's actions were not just miscalculations, but part of a broader pattern of corruption. One afternoon, while poring over a set of financial statements from the HOA, Judge Davis stumbled upon a series of irregular transactions. There were payments made to developers that seemed disproportionately high compared to the services provided, which raised immediate red flags. The more he investigated, the more connections began to form, a web of bribery and kickbacks that painted a damning picture of Eleanor's dealings. It appeared that she had been leveraging her position for personal gain, favoring certain developers in exchange for financial incentives. Equipped with this information, Judge Davis called James into his study to share his findings. As he laid out the evidence on the table, charts illustrating financial discrepancies, copies of contracts marked with questionable terms, James's heart raced with a mix of hope and disbelief. "This is it," his father said, pointing to a particularly egregious entry. "This shows collusion between Eleanor and these developers. If we can prove this, we can bring her down." Motivated by the prospect of justice, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. They needed to act quickly to gather more evidence before Eleanor caught wind of their investigation. Together, they reached out to neighbors who had voiced concerns about Eleanor's governance, hoping to find allies who might have useful information or experiences to share. Many residents were willing to contribute their accounts, stories of unjust fines, arbitrary rule enforcement, and similar experiences with Eleanor's heavy-handed tactics. As they built their case, the duo decided to escalate their efforts by consulting additional legal experts who specialized in HOA laws and governance. This team provided invaluable insights into how to navigate the complexities involved in addressing corruption within homeowners associations. Equipped with both local support and legal backing, James and his father began strategizing how best to present their findings at the upcoming HOA meeting. The day of the meeting arrived, and tension hung thick in the air as residents gathered. James felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. This was not just about confronting Eleanor, but reclaiming their community from her oppressive grip. As they prepared to present their evidence, he looked around at his neighbors, many of whom had suffered under Eleanor's regime, and felt a collective resolve begin to form. When it was finally their turn to speak, Judge Davis took the lead. With calm authority, he presented the findings methodically, revealing the web of corruption that had infiltrated their community governance. Gasps echoed throughout the room as neighbors absorbed the implications of what was being unveiled. Eleanor's face turned a shade paler as she realized her reign was slipping away. The questions began to fly, demanding answers for her actions and her unyielding refusal to uphold the very community standards she claimed to protect. As the atmosphere shifted from passive acceptance to defiant outrage, James felt an electrifying sense of empowerment surge through him. This was no longer just a battle against one person's tyranny. It had transformed into a movement for transparency and integrity within Willow Creek Estates, a fight for every resident affected by Eleanor's abuses. With solidarity growing among his neighbors and mounting evidence against Eleanor, James knew they were on the precipice of change that would redefine their community for years to come. As news of the investigation into Eleanor Thompson began to circulate among the residents of Willow Creek Estates, a palpable shift occurred in the community's atmosphere. What had previously been a climate of fear and oppression transformed into one of solidarity and resolve. Neighbors who had once kept their heads down, fearing retaliation from the HOA President, started to gather in small groups, sharing their experiences and frustrations over Eleanor's heavy-handed tactics. James and Judge Davis, recognizing the momentum building around them, organized a meeting in the community center to discuss their findings and encourage others to come forward with their stories. They designed flyers detailing the meeting's purpose, an opportunity for residents to voice their concerns and stand united against Eleanor's tyranny. The response was overwhelming, word spread quickly, and by the time the meeting day arrived, the room was filled with concerned neighbors eager for change. As James stood at the front of the room, he felt a surge of gratitude seeing familiar faces, friends and neighbors who had endured similar indignities at Eleanor's hands. The energy was electric as people exchanged stories of unjust fines, arbitrary regulations, and their personal encounters with Eleanor's oppressive rule. It was clear that James and his father were not alone in their fight. They had ignited a spark within the community that had long been dormant. Judge Davis opened the meeting by outlining the evidence they had gathered against Eleanor, the financial discrepancies, the conflicts of interest, and the testimonies of those affected by her rule. Each piece of information felt like a brick lifted from the shoulders of those present as they learned they were not isolated victims, but part of something much larger, a collective movement for justice. "I know many of you have feared speaking out," Judge Davis began, his voice steady but passionate. "But it's time we reclaim our community from those who abuse their power. Together, we can ensure Willow Creek Estates remains a place where families can thrive without fear." Encouraged by his words, residents began to express their support with fervent nods and murmurs of agreement. One neighbor stood up and recounted how Eleanor had fined him for having a family gathering on holiday weekends, citing noise complaints that were never substantiated, a story that resonated deeply with many in attendance. As stories were shared, the sense of camaraderie grew. Neighbors began to raise their voices together, expressing frustrations that had festered for far too long. The atmosphere shifted from somber to hopeful as residents recognized their strength and unity. This was no longer just James's fight or Judge Davis's, it was theirs as well. Feeling emboldened by this newfound solidarity, James presented a plan. They would gather signatures demanding an immediate investigation into Eleanor's actions and call for her resignation from the HOA board. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers, energized by the prospect of reclaiming control over their community governance. By the end of the meeting, it became clear that they were ready to take action together. James could hardly believe how quickly things had changed. What began as a personal struggle now evolved into a grassroots effort aimed at dismantling corruption within their very own neighborhood. With determination coursing through them all, they set out not just to confront Eleanor, but to ensure that Willow Creek Estates would become a symbol of transparency and accountability moving forward. The next steps loomed ahead with challenges undoubtedly waiting in the shadows, but James felt invigorated knowing that he was no longer facing this battle alone. United with his neighbors, and fueled by both anger and hope, they were ready to demand justice for their community once and for all. The day of reckoning for the corrupt HOA board arrived, and a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air at the community center. Residents of Willow Creek Estates gathered in large numbers, their faces a mixture of hope and determination. After months of struggle against Eleanor Thompson's oppressive rule, this meeting represented a pivotal moment they had all been waiting for, a chance to reclaim their community. James felt the weight of responsibility as he took his place beside his father, Judge William Davis, at the front of the room. The atmosphere buzzed with energy. Neighbors exchanged encouraging glances, united in their shared desire for change. As Judge Davis prepared to present their findings, James looked around at those who had rallied behind him, families who had felt powerless under Eleanor's reign and now were ready to stand up for their rights. When Judge Davis began his presentation, he spoke with conviction, detailing the investigation's findings, evidence of financial fraud, bribery schemes involving developers, and Eleanor's blatant misuse of power. He laid bare the very foundation of corruption that had plagued their community for far too long. Each revelation sent waves through the crowd, fueling their resolve. Gasps erupted as residents realized how deeply they had been wronged and how far-reaching Eleanor's actions truly were. Today, Judge Davis proclaimed, "We take back control of our home. We will not let one person dictate how we live or who we can have in our own homes." Thunderous applause followed his declaration, resonating with the collective spirit ignited within each attendee. As James took the floor to share his own experiences, his struggles with fines, the unjust ban on family visits, and Eleanor's obstruction during a medical emergency, he could see anger and empathy reflected in his neighbors' eyes. They knew firsthand what he had endured. It was a shared trauma that bound them together in solidarity. "We have an unprecedented opportunity here," James urged, his voice steady but passionate. "Let us not only confront Eleanor but create a community that values transparency and fairness moving forward." His words struck a chord. Many residents nodded in agreement and muttered affirmations. With mounting support from those present, they proposed actionable steps, gathering signatures for a petition demanding Eleanor's resignation from her position on the board and advocating for an entirely new governing body dedicated to serving the community's interests rather than self-serving agendas. As discussions flowed freely among residents after James's speech, ideas poured out about how to reshape HOA governance. The crowd transformed into a dynamic force seeking justice. They shared personal accounts that echoed James's experience, each story further solidifying their collective mission. Fueled by this newfound unity and clarity of purpose, they solidified plans to organize an official vote during the next HOA meeting aimed at disbanding Eleanor's corrupt board entirely. The time for change had come. No longer would they suffer under fear and oppression. By the end of the meeting, there was an undeniable shift in Willow Creek Estates, a transformation from dread into empowerment. With confidence coursing through them all like electricity, they stepped towards reclaiming their lives and ensuring that no family would face tyranny or injustice again. James stood alongside his father, feeling invigorated by this momentum as they prepared to fight not just for themselves, but for every resident who deserved to feel safe in their own community once more. Together, with unwavering resolve, they would pave the way toward establishing a more transparent governing body that prioritized integrity above all else. The day of voting finally arrived, and James Davis felt a mixture of nerves and excitement as he prepared to step into a role he had never imagined for himself. The community's campaign against the corrupt HOA board had been a journey of empowerment, unity, and resilience, and now it was time to choose a new leader, one who would prioritize fairness, transparency, and the well-being of all residents. As people gathered at the community center to cast their votes, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Long gone were the whispers of fear that had once silenced the voices of so many. Now, neighbors exchanged hopeful smiles and confident nods, ready to embrace a brighter future together. James knew that this moment represented more than just an election. It was an opportunity to redefine the values that governed Willow Creek Estates. When the votes were tallied, a hush fell over the crowd as they awaited the announcement. Judge Davis stood at the podium, his expression serious yet proud. "I am pleased to announce that James Davis has been elected as the new president of the HOA." The room erupted into cheers and applause, a wave of relief and joy washing over everyone present. James couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by the support from his neighbors, who had rallied around him through thick and thin. This victory wasn't just about him. It was about restoring their collective voice within the community and ensuring that no one would suffer under an oppressive regime again. As he stepped forward to address his fellow residents, he felt determined to honor their trust. "Thank you all for believing in me and supporting our cause," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This victory is not mine alone. It belongs to each one of you who fought for change. Together, we have proven that we can stand against tyranny." He outlined his vision for Willow Creek Estates, one where guest policies would be fair and reasonable, where families would not be treated like criminals for wanting to spend time together. I promise to work tirelessly to implement changes that reflect our community's values, he continued passionately. We will establish an HOA that is transparent and accountable, a governing body that serves your interests. As he shared ideas for upcoming initiatives, including community meetings to discuss residents, concerns regularly and revisions to outdated policies, James could see enthusiasm building among his neighbors. They were ready for a new chapter, one that celebrated collaboration rather than division. Afterward, as members of the community approached him with words of encouragement and support, James realized how deeply this experience had changed him. He had entered Willow Creek Estates hoping for a fresh start, but found himself in the middle of a battle that reshaped his understanding of community involvement and leadership. With Judge Davis by his side as an advisor, James felt confident in laying down a foundation based on inclusivity. He organized committees to tackle various issues, from landscaping to social events, ensuring that everyone in the neighborhood had a stake in shaping their living environment. As weeks passed, it became clear that James's leadership was ushering in a new era for Willow Creek Estates. Residents began engaging more actively in community discussions. They felt empowered to bring forth their ideas without fear of retaliation. Together, they worked diligently on implementing revised guest policies that allowed families greater freedom while maintaining a sense of decorum within the community. No longer would Eleanor's iron grip dictate their lives. Instead, Willow Creek Estates thrived under shared values of collaboration and respect. Through unity and determination, James had not only reclaimed his own sense of home, but also transformed Willow Creek Estates into a beacon of hope, a place where families could gather without fear, and where everyone's voice contributed to shaping their shared future. With James now at the helm as president of the HOA, a new era dawned for Willow Creek Estates. His election signified not just a change in leadership, but a restoration of community values that had been all but lost under Eleanor Thompson's oppressive rule. The air was charged with optimism as residents embraced the opportunity to rebuild their neighborhood into a place where fairness, transparency, and mutual respect reigned supreme. As James settled into his role, he wasted no time in reaching out to the residents to discuss their ideas and concerns. He organized regular town hall meetings, transforming the once quiet gatherings into vibrant forums where every voice was heard. It was heartening to witness people engaging freely, sharing their thoughts on everything from landscaping choices to neighborly events, topics that had previously been overshadowed by fear of repercussions. One of James's first initiatives as president was to revise the guest policy that had previously instilled fear among families wishing to gather. He proposed a plan that allowed for more flexible guest visitation rules while maintaining reasonable boundaries to ensure community decorum. "This is our home, and families should feel welcome here," he asserted during one of the meetings, prompting applause and cheers from his fellow residents. The new policies were drafted collaboratively, drawing suggestions from various community members who had felt marginalized under Eleanor's regime. James knew that involving everyone in decision-making would foster a sense of ownership over their community and help heal the wounds left by past conflicts. In addition to policy changes, James emphasized community-building initiatives that would strengthen bonds among residents. Together with neighbors, he organized events like family potlucks and seasonal celebrations, occasions designed to bring everyone together in joy and camaraderie. The laughter echoing across backyards became a testament to the renewed spirit within Willow Creek Estates. As the months progressed, James's leadership continued to inspire residents to take an active role in their community. People felt empowered to voice their opinions and advocate for improvements without fear of retaliation. No longer did they have to navigate an oppressive bureaucracy. Instead, they found strength in unity and collaboration. However, it wasn't just about enjoying newfound freedom. James also understood the importance of vigilance against potential abuses of power. He established a committee dedicated to monitoring HOA activities, ensuring transparency in all dealings and fostering accountability among board members. This proactive approach would prevent any repetition of past transgressions and maintain trust within the community. One day, as James walked through the neighborhood, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come since those tumultuous days under Eleanor's rule. Families were out enjoying their lawns, children played freely together in safe spaces, and the overall sense of belonging was palpable. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that they had transformed Willow Creek Estates into a welcoming environment for all. Ultimately, this journey reinforced an essential truth. Standing against injustice fosters not only resilience, but also integrity within a community. By working together and demanding accountability from their leaders, residents had reclaimed their rights and dignity. And in doing so, they built a thriving neighborhood where families could visit without fear of harassment or undue scrutiny. James Davis understood that while challenges would inevitably arise, the foundation they had laid would ensure that no one would ever have to face such tyranny again. Their triumph over adversity served as a guiding light for future generations, a vivid reminder of what it means to fight for community integrity and stand united against injustice.